Hello and welcome to the build overview of Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection with Rakiata's Dance. This big old sword right here, this big boy. So I league started Self-Reflection and was trying actually a Scion with some one-handed versions and tried White Wind. Didn't quite go as far as I wanted it to, so as soon as I switched over to Guardian and tried this sword, it just took off, and I've been very happy with it ever since. I've got some pros and some cons. What I've enjoyed about it is it has a very strong start. You're very powerful if you go ahead and get the sword in advance and finish the campaign with it. And you can rocket your way through white and yellow maps. And oh, look, I remembered to turn on D&D this time. And from there, its progression is very incremental. What I mean is that just as you're leveling up, not even trying to farm that hard, and you just sell what you get or stock up your currency, you can afford and upgrade as you go, and there's not any really big hurdles in the budget, so you can very easily progress this build very smoothly, and you feel every upgrade too. The damage escalates pretty quickly as you attack things on, and defenses are also felt very strongly too. I'll go over the basic concepts here. Real quick, I want to mention that if you do have a much higher budget, you might want to check out Remicaster's Voidforge Necromancer using Voidforge with Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection. Much higher budget. I'll go ahead and link that in the description if you want to check that out too. For the Rakiata's Dance version here, where I've taken it to, I've cleared some Uber bosses and some Molocrum and done a lot of high juice farming in the T16s, and feels very good to play. And at this point, we're looking at about 70 divines of investment. I'll have 3 phases to show. I'll have actually a lot of stuff in the description, including gameplay. I won't be doing gameplay in this video, but linked in the description will be some gameplay videos. So if you actually want to see that first before you watch the rest of this, just pause and open it and go check that out. I'll have a couple of Uber boss kills, some Molocrum Wave 30 clear, and even a mapping video. All right, so we'll just go over the basic concepts here. When you're using Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection, you're summoning a copy of the weapon you have equipped, right? And it has a lower maximum summon than regular Animate Weapon. Default is 5 and then 6 with 20 quality, and then 7 if you can get over 40 quality, which we do here at this point in the build. Thanks to, I'll just skip ahead here, mention Ashes of the Stars, which I was a little unsure about trying because they nerfed it pretty hard and it's got no life, but actually they really buffed quality on a lot of skills, and this actually brings a lot of value to the build, so I'm happy with keeping Ashes of the Stars. But the cornerstone of the build is, of course, your weapon, and this big old weapon right here has a very interesting effect. Treats enemy monster elemental resistance values as inverted. So this means, of course, if the enemy has 40% resists, those attacks will treat it as if it's negative 40%. So it's like you're getting 80 pen. Pinnacle bosses have 50% resists, so that's like getting 100 pen. And then there's a lot of times the game is trying to increase your difficulty by raising enemy resists, and that gives a very feels-good effect for this build, one of the reasons I've really enjoyed it. You get more DPS when the enemies have more resists, and that can come from map mods. If you roll a map with higher enemy resists, that's just a faster clear. Expedition can raise enemy resists a lot and raise their maximum resists. Same with Eater of Worlds altars, or invitations, including like Uber Searing, Exarch, Uber Eater of Worlds, or just the Feared or the Elder Slayers. You get more DPS, you can deliberately roll that item with higher resists on the enemies if you want for an easier time. So it kind of has a normalization effect where there's a smaller gap between easy enemies and tough enemies. Until you start doing lots of Wildwood juice, even then, or like high delirium, that adds just straight damage reduction to those enemies. So you can still benefit if they have higher resists, but straight damage reduction effects, those still scale the same. To just go over the basic skill set here, how you're playing. So Animate Weapon, of course, your main ability. You can summon up to seven of them by the time you have Ashes of the Stars. When you're just getting started, I highly recommend just starting out at 20% quality as soon as you can. Even if you need to throw 20 gem cutters at it, but I doubt you'll need to. You can probably buy one cheaper than that. That'll keep you at 6 Animate Weapons, and that's strong enough to get you through a whole lot of content. Since we don't have to worry about curses like elemental weakness, we can just go all in on crit. So we're using Spirit Offering and Assassin's Mark for our curse. Taking advantage of Mark on hit because we also want to use Smite. Smite's an attack, which is important, and it hits enemies, and it grants this added lightning and higher chance to shock. But since we're crit, we don't really care about the chance to shock. We get shocks whenever they crit, and those are going to be higher shocks anyway because it's crit. Of course, we're keeping our Summon Sentinel of Radiance. That's your big butter boy. Gives you a nice 20% damage reduction. 20% of the damage you take from hits goes to him instead, so that helps keep you alive. The life pool doesn't get very high. Can't get much higher than this, unfortunately, but we've got a lot of defensive layers to make this count for a lot. And a lot of sustain, which I'll get to. Val Haste, definitely the best Val skill you could use. If you don't want to go with the defensive setup I've got, you could try maybe Val Molten Shell, but I think the option I got set up is better and lets you use Val Haste for a nice DPS moment whenever you really want to crank things up. And just Flame Dash for moving around, especially with Ashes of the Stars. You get a lot of Flame Dashes. You can use it almost as much as you want. And Desecrate, of course. Desecrate has an added bonus. Once you get your Devouring Diadem, you see those corpses disappeared. Devouring Diadem doesn't just give you Eldritch Battery for free and a bunch of reservation efficiency. It also gives you that Feast of Flesh. And I'll mention a little bit of some alternate setups you could do, but Feast of Flesh complements the Guardian Ascendancy very well. So one of the things people kind of complain about with Guardian is Time of Need, that it's only every 4 seconds. Instead, you'd rather have 25% regen every second than 100% only every 4 seconds, right? So it feels incidental, and you don't know where you're at you don't know when your next heal is, so you're just going to use your health pot, and maybe you'll waste a health pot, right? When you add another 5-second increment on that to another big heal, and it is a big heal, it's usually right up to full on your life and energy shield, it feels a lot more consistent, and a lot of times you'll see yourself heal right back up before you can react to it with the life flask anyway. So those go together very well. And one alternate setup you could do is go for another unset ring, so you can make room for another gem and use 2 Desecrates. So I got one here, and I've already got a cast when damage taken, something I highly recommend, only level 1. You could go ahead and also link in your second Desecrate level 1, so that anytime you're getting hit, you'll trigger the other thing we're doing, but you'll also often trigger Desecrate and just automate some corpse generation for Feast of Flesh. Did that for a little while. It does feel really nice. It's a lot more consistent on the Feast of Flesh. And instead, though, I'm still just sticking with Immortal Call, and there's a specific reason why this is ideal, and just keeping it at level 3 so that we can link it to a level 1 cast when damage taken. So that's what we're using for our guard skill. And this is kind of another guard skill. So the reason why Devouring Diadem is important, because of the second most important item, Replica Covenant. So regular Covenant does added chaos, right? Level 29. This is the cold version, level 29 added cold. Regular Covenant adds a life cost. Replica Covenant adds an energy shield cost. And it's pretty hefty. Like you can see, if you want to summon all 7, that'll actually take all your energy shield. But you can drop some corpses, and Feast of Flesh can pop you back up while you're still summoning them. But it's a pretty hefty cost. So, with this effect, you need to be an Eldritch Battery build. Either that or a totally different build that leeches Energy Shield. For our links with Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection, of course you can run around with Melee Splash and swap it for a higher DPS gem when you want. I think, what's the one? Yeah, Elemental Damage with Attacks is going to be your better DPS gem. And minion damage, these are just highly upgraded. You know, it doesn't have to be awakened right away. Now, Predator is important. These swords are not aggressive like SRS. They follow you around, like phantasms, specters, and zombies. Or so, like if you use Convocation, all your swords would come back to you, and they would stop attacking until they travel back. So I don't use Convocation in this build. So we rely on Signal Prey from Predator, and your swords will go and attack whatever you signal. And real quick, I'll mention a little trick I do to save buttons. I have the way I explain this is that I have a friend. My friend's name is Razor, and he likes to press Signal Prey like a split second before I press the smite button. And because Signal Prey is an instant cast, it has no effect on the attack time of smite. So with one button, we smite him, we Signal Prey, we mark on hit Assassin's Mark, and on top of that, since it's an attack recent, we get our 25% attack block. And then everything else is the spells, so that'll trigger your spell block too. So that's how we take advantage of Bastion of Hope constantly and keep our block chance up. Besides that, increased crit damage for the crit multiplier. I used to use increased critical strikes until I realized that Ruthless is slightly better. It can also produce higher shocks. So if you look in POB, they're almost identical damage, just in calculated DPS. If we were to toggle them both off and look at the 33.0, 32.8, almost exactly the same. Oh, wait a minute. If they're the same level, that's right. I knew it. I knew I was forgetting that. Increased critical strikes is very slightly more straight DPS, but Ruthless is kind of a new kind of crit that can stack on top of a crit in a high lightning roll. So Ruthless, we also get a ton of attacks per second. Let me see if it's going to say like 5.62 times 7. So we can expect with the Ruthless enough of those that are going to be crits with good rolls on the lightning damage that we can see higher shock effects with Ruthless out instead of critical strikes, even though we get fewer crits. With this setup right now, we're looking at over 60% crit chance. If we were to turn on the crit gem, well, I'm dumb. What am I doing wrong? I'm looking at the wrong skill. All right, without the crit gem, 5408. With the crit gem, 81.49. So that's a really high crit chance. But there are some mods like Simulacrum or Expedition where enemies are crit resistant, but there's no Ruthless resistant enemies. So this is better general purpose. And it's going to be hard to quantify, but I'm sure that with the higher shock values, it's going to be a little bit better DPS anyway. So that kind of covers what I call phase 3 here, including the Darkness Enthroned, and then I'll bring up the jewels too. So between your Ghastly jewels, you do need a Taunt and a Blind effect. And here with all the upgrades before I ran into the Ubers was Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame for Augury of Penitence. I got a nice Watcher's Eye with some damage shifting to Elemental and some spell suppression. We went ahead and switched from regular purity of elements to triple purity. So all 3 of the purities and still keeping determination, which means that we have haste and grace and all 3 purities. So while this could very well be an expensive Watcher's Eye. You've got physical shifted to elemental options for all 3 purities, and spell suppression option from either Grace or Haste. So that can actually turn, you can actually find, like I ended up getting this for only 2 Divines. And when I was shopping, it was mostly under 5 Divines. Whereas if you're, these stats are normally going to be very valuable. If that was instead Purity of Elements, I think it's a lot more expensive because people are more likely to run. Purity of Lightning and Purity of Fire are probably going to be cheaper because Purity of Ice is more common because it synergizes with other stuff. Also grabbed a Quickening Covenant. At this point in the build, this ended up being a little more damage than Fortress Covenant, but they're close to the same value, but Fortress Covenant's more expensive. This is just because we've stacked so much minion damage at this point that it's diminishing returns as you stack more increase. Eventually, the 16% attack speed is going to be more valuable than the 45% increased damage. And still got the Impossible Escape, and I'll actually include a chapter here about the Elegant Hubris and timestamp that. But for now, also needed to talk about the Spectres because that was another important upgrade for this level of the build. Which, by the way, where we're looking right now is at least almost 31.5 million DPS on bosses. And I say at least because we don't have Val Haste turned on. And we're also kind of lowballing the charge situation. So they get frenzy charges from the Tiger, and the Tiger attacks pretty fast. And they get power charges from Assassin's Mark, which, with this setup, Ashes of the Stars, is increasing that chance for them to get a power charge on hit, and they're attacking very quickly. And those power charges have a duration of 12 seconds, so each sword can easily get to 3 power charges and stay there as long as it's alive. But when you resummon a sword, that sword doesn't have any charges yet. So you could say an average of 2 power charges per sword and an average of 1 frenzy charge per sword is going to be pretty likely. But it can quite possibly be a lot closer to this, right? Where you're almost at 35 million. But just round down a little bit to keep things realistic. And if you were to add Val Haste on top of that, like you could potentially peak over 40 million damage. And you can feel it when that happens too. For the Spectres, this is again the expensive setup. I'll start with the cheap Spectres. The what's his Miscreation? Hulking Miscreation. I actually ended up and got the perfect Hulking Miscreation just because it's not too expensive now, but you really don't need it. It adds just a tiny bit of damage. The regular Hulking Miscreation's very much cheaper and 99% as good. The perfect Primal Thunderbird, this guy squawking here, he gives Grace. He's the squishiest of the Spectres. That's another reason I kind of like having him. First off, Grace helps us a lot, but secondly, if a Spectre is going to die, the first one will probably be Thunderbird, which is nice because the next 2 Spectres are not as cheap. Perfect Primal Thunderbird is, I think, under 50 chaos, maybe even less at this point. It was always not one of the expensive ones. Perfect Naval Officer. This would be your first expensive Spectre to get. The regular Naval Officer is what you would have first, though. He gives precision. They give the same precision aura. But the perfect Naval Officer gives 10 fortification to him and nearby allies. So you're going to spend 4 or 5 Divines, I think, at this point. I think that's still where the price is at. So this is a late game upgrade. And before you get to this point, you'll want to have already been running with the cheaper Spectres, and 3 of them, including the Thunderbird and an Animate Guardian with a cheaper setup. But you'll want to know that you can keep the Spectres alive. And then you'll get him first because he increases the defenses of the rest of your other Spectres. When you finally get to your 4th Spectre, you'll go ahead and get the Tiger. You can get the cheap Tiger just to start with. The regular Forest Tiger, non-perfect, does still give the frenzy charges to allies, so that's still very good as your 4th Spectre. But you'll save up and get, I think it's 6 Divines now, get your perfect Forest Tiger there. He has the Haste aura, And before that point, you're actually going to be running haste in your Devouring Diadem, and so you don't have room for the triple purity setup. This lets you take out the regular purity of elements and squeeze in triple purity, which is a big defensive boost too. So you end up with big offensive and defensive boosts as you finally raise up your Spectres. Now, keeping them alive, in order to do that, I've got a few things going on. And the first one, of course, is using the sword for its 6-link. One difficult part is going to be getting 4 blue sockets into a Rakiata stance. What I just did was color it until I had 3 blue and 3 red, which takes probably a few hundred chromes on average anyway. And then I hit it with Varici, and then you have a very high chance to turn one of the red sockets into white, and now you're good. Maybe you'll get all 6 white, right? In those links, of course, raise Spectre and Animate Guardian. We're going with minion life, make them healthy, meat shield, make them tanky, and feeding frenzy, obviously need, and empower. You don't get your 4th Spectre until you have the level 4 empower with Ashes of the Stars and a level 21 raise Spectre gem, because this is not a build that likes to stack plus minion levels. There's not a lot of room for it anyway. You could also do this with just a +1 amulet, not necessarily Ashes of the Stars, but you get, a lot more value out of the extra quality. That's where you get your 7th Animate weapon. So you can't get your 4th Spectre until you put all that together, and then you get the regular Forest Tiger, and the next thing you're saving up for is the perfect Forest Tiger. So before you finish your expensive Spectres, you should already know how tanky they are. Now, this 6-link alone makes them tanky, but we've also got a good bit going on. First off, we are grabbing the Sacrifice Wheel. It's right next to Spiritual Command anyway, which gives us a lot of attack speed because we use Smite. It helps for Smite to be nice and fast. You could also, if you wanted, you could Leap Slam or maybe even Whirling Blades if you want to squeeze in another movement skill. So the attack speed is very helpful. And we're running a couple of medium clusters with defensive stuff too. So the first important one is going to be Life from Death. This makes it so that when one of your other minions dies, which anytime you're resummoning a sword, you already have 7 or 6, and you resummon and it kills the oldest one, that counts as a minion death. 4% heal on the other Spectres. And of course, minion life. And it gives you some regen too. And Dread March. I like having 2 Dread Marches. First off, you want the move speed. Move speed for your minions is a DPS stat when your minions need to travel to enemies. You also get more minion life, physical damage reduction, and chaos resist. So 2 of these have a really nice effect on the build, and it also gives you a place to squeeze in a Feasting Fiends so that your swords can leech life. In a reason that this goes very well with this build to stack some good minion defense is that your swords take hits too. Your swords are the front line most of the time. Your Spectres are not going to taunt everything, and you want taunt chance on your jewels anyway, so your swords are going to be taking a lot of damage. You want the swords to be pretty beefy too. There's another advantage that comes from getting your perfect Forest Tiger. It's not just defense for you. Getting triple purity is also defense for the Spectres. It raises their maximum resists. In the Mastery, you're looking at getting the +8, and then they get another +5 from your auras, and they're at 88%. They're at 88% elemental resists, which is really nice. And they've got chaos resistant and physical damage reduction. So I haven't had these guys die in several simulacrums and uber bosses and lots of juiced maps and expeditions with the Wildwood juice, which gets really gnarly. Haven't seen them die. The only when I was first kind of figuring things out, I lost a Thunderbird a couple times, but it's cheap enough that it wasn't that big of a deal. And then I didn't use the Thunderbird for a while, and then after things seemed like they were doing pretty well and staying alive, I went ahead and got the Thunderbird again, and I've never seen a Spectre or the Animate Guardian taking any damage ever since. To finish talking about the expensive stuff with this, what I call Phase 3, we have a Kingmaker on the Animate Guardian. So I'm going to pull up his item set. This will be in the POB. Kingmaker. And yeah, you get rarity, right? Awesome. Choline Strike, 50 crit multi, and another 10 fortification, which stacks with the Naval Officer that you see we're at 20 fortification. So this again is another big upgrade that makes you a lot tankier. We're still wearing Eye of Malice. This makes a whole lot of difference. If we look at the, we put back on the right items and we go over to config, you'll notice in the notes here in the config, the custom modifiers, you have to put in all the effects to see the numbers. If we were to cancel out the Eye of Malice, what is that? Oh, that's over 3 million DPS we lose from the helmet. So lots of value on the Eye of Malice. Raises the enemy resists, which then get reverted harder. Southbound, just you want to get one, the increased maximum life. You don't care about the resist because it'll be way over cap anyway. Southbound with 16% max life has a huge effect on the Animate Guardian. Want to make sure you have boots with Brittle Ground, Searing Exarch, Eldritch Implicit. The rest isn't that important except for the Chaos Resist. A nice little benefit is to go for the increased life regeneration rate because Animate Guardian has such a huge life pool. He is going to have a lot of base regen, and so that's a nice big number to be affected by the when you're multiplying it, right? So not counting another big item that I haven't gone over yet, he still just kind of has a baseline of 2,242.9 life recovered per second all the time, with a maximum life pool of 86,000, almost 87,000. And again, without the other item really being considered, he's still looking at an EHP of 1.5 million. And this is not counting because the game is not aware of the mechanic, or POB is not aware of the mechanic, Doppelganger guys. So this is how you get an immortal Animate Guardian. Regenerate 10 life over 1 second when hit while sane. He can't use the Unhinged skill, so he's always sane by default. And this is confirmed and tested long ago. This has been one of the best defensive items for Animate Guardian for a long time. Probably the best. And 40% less physical and chaos damage taken. And it doesn't say from hits, so that includes dots. Chaos is a lot of dots, right? Or bleed is a physical dot. Corrupted blood is a physical dot. The Giga AG is immortal. Your Spectres will die 4 times over before Animate Guardian will even come close. So these are some very, very tanky but expensive Spectres and Animate Guardian. And I think that's where you want to go if you want to really try and push the build and not worry about it. Which I was nervous about it at first until I realized just how fine they were, and I just have to worry about myself not dying. So at this setup, we're looking at our own resistance being at 82% and the 4400 and tons of incidental regen and just some decent utility flasks. These don't change the world. The one other really nice upgrade waiting for me to afford it is Progenesis. And that is another 70 divines. So who knows if I'll ever make that happen. I just started a new job. I don't know how much more Path of Exile I'm going to play or if I'm going to do another build, but maybe I will try and farm that up. I don't know. If I do, maybe I'll make another video and update. Progenesis would make an immense difference on this build because it complements the regen so well. Let me go ahead and talk about that other defensive layer then, being Immortal Call with cast when damage taken, because that leads us into the Elegant Hubris. I'll go ahead and make this section now. From Elegant Hubris, you can get the node Eternal Resilience, and I highly recommend you try to do this too. You're gaining endurance charges all the time, basically. If you've been hit recently, gain an endurance charge every second. You cap out at 3, of course. There's no easy way to get more than 4 endurance charges, except maybe like boot corruption or some other random stuff. And then the charge duration is 12 seconds, right? So whenever you take enough damage, that's going to trigger Immortal Call, eat 3 of the endurance charges, and then they'll come back over 3 seconds. And that gives you a longer duration Immortal Call and more physical mitigation as well. So this has really helped the build survive a lot more situations. On top of that, Elegant Hubris is the jewel that can roll Slumlord, the one everybody wants, but is really expensive sometimes, meaning still 80% increased damage. Axiom Warden, which I do go ahead and grab one of these. This is a nice place for your Impossible Escape, you get this wheel. So I recommend this Impossible Escape. They're pretty cheap. They've always been pretty cheap, like less than 50 chaos. This lets you have access to another node here. Your Elegant Hubris, whatever you find, will probably be different, so I don't know if anything good will be here, but this expands your options a little. And other good stuff you can find, like Shock Avoidance, Spell Block. There's Attack Block and Maximum Life and Chaos Resist and Spell Suppression and Aura Effect. There's a lot of different really good Elegant Hubris mods. It's not just for Slumlord, but you do want Slumlord. And you do want Caspero to be the one commemorated. Caspero turns the Keystone into Supreme Ostentation right here. Grab that, because we are a build with not a lot of rare items, and we need a lot of value out of these rare items. And maybe it would be possible, but with a much higher budget, to get the attributes we want. Because we have Supreme Ostentation, we get to run both high dex and high strength, and even high intelligence requirements, and just not worry about it ever. And that lets you focus on chaos resist and spell suppression and everything else you want. So maybe if you get extremely stacked and perfect rares, you can drop Supreme Ostentation, but definitely not yet. And I have no inkling to do so. One thing I did to get the character up to the level that it can take care of Ubers was I dropped the extra skill duration wheel, which I do miss, but it's nice because the swords dying and being replaced more frequently does mean more life from death procs, which does help the Spectres and Animate Guardian stay topped off. So for your Elegant Hubris, here's how you find your Elegant Hubris. There's a great tool in Path of Building. Find your Timeless Jewel, right? So this is going to be the section to use, and this is just the nodes that I'm using. But what we'll do, let's pretend we're looking for a new one. Let's go ahead and select all of the easily accessed nodes here. We'll just say all the nodes that are 2 points or less to get, right? You're just doing this in POB. And you've got all of those selected. Maybe you can, if you really want to commit, or you just really want to get the cheapest one you can find, you can grab the ones that are 3 nodes to travel to. But unless you really just want to spend 10 chaos or something, I recommend you just look at these nodes because they're all 2 points or less to travel to. And we'll go over to Find Timeless Jewel. First thing you need to do is select where it's going to socket. This is the agnostic section. You see it shows you which part of the tree each one's at. So we'll go to the agnostic. Conqueror. Before that, you need to choose Elegant Hubris. And Conqueror, again, needs to be Caspero. If you are not going to go for the Supreme Ostentation yet, and you just want to maybe get a Slumlord just so you can farm, just level up faster and only spend 10 chaos or something, maybe you can just say, I don't care about the Conqueror. I am agnostic about the Conqueror. But Caspero is where you want to end up. And this here, you can add the nodes that you want. You see Axiom Warden's right at the top because it's alphabetical order. Your Slumlord is here. Eternal Resilience, again, is the one that gives you the endurance charges and lets you run the Immortal Call, cast when damage taken setup. And let's just say I want one of each. A Slumlord, that's, you see it adding it to the list here, and an Axiom Warden. And don't forget to check Filter Nodes so that it's only looking at the nodes that we've already got selected. So that's why we selected it earlier. And now we can search, and it's going to produce a list from best to worst. Although it doesn't know exactly what you want, like this, for example, it's got 4 desirable nodes, but 2 of them are Axiom Warden. I guess the perfect one would be 2 Slumlords, right? So you'll see we've got the Eternal Resilience is the first in the list because of the order that we added them. So Eternal Resilience, Slumlord, Axiom Warden, Axiom Warden. So if we wanted to make sure we got one of each, well, we can see right here, here's an example of a number with all of them. And then here's a couple more examples of numbers with all of them. And easiest way to go searching for them, you could just look at the numbers and go type them into the trade search, or copy trade URL, paste it, do a search, and boom, look at that. For one divine, there's 3 of them, and let's see, 14, 8,000. Which one was that? Oh, look at that. Perfect. 3 of them right there for anybody to take. And then you can kind of see, once you have it, you can maybe plug it in. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. And cancel. And you see, if I've already got an Elegant Hubris selected, but that's the one I actually have. You'll see it's added the 1. You can see the brackets and the number. Let's switch it over. And let's see what nodes we got. Look at that spell block. We weren't even looking for that. We don't care about the power charges. Don't care about the mana regeneration. We don't care about the projectile attack damage. There's our Eternal Resilience. There's our Axiom Warden. And there's our Slumlord. So look at that. That's a pretty darn good jewel. And there's 3 of them right there for 1 divine. So if you want it, go get it. That's how you find your Elegant Hubris. All right. I think that has covered. Let's see here. Yeah, that's covered everything that's been an update and where the build's at right now. And I've got a couple more things to talk about. We can back out of this, what I call the Phase 3. That's using just all the gear I actually have right now. I've got 3 other POBs I'll go ahead and link. Phase 1, I'm calling, is absolute bare minimum. Real quick, speaking of bare minimum, if I didn't do this already, Rakiata's Dance, if you just go buy the cheapest one you want, you don't care about the rolls, they're less than 30 chaos. This item has dropped in price just because it's not very meta. So you can buy yourself a Rakiata's Dance and an Eye of Malice and throw them on at level 48. Before level 48, the only part that's up to you, just level however you want, is getting to level 10. Level 10 is when you can start using Animate Weapon of Self-Reflection. If you can, go buy one that's level 1 with 20% quality. I don't know how much those are, but then you'll have your 6. And the best weapon to use right away, in my opinion, is the Princess, or you can just find whatever unique you want. If you want to just start two-hander and just make sure that you're two-hander the whole way so that you don't miss it when you have to throw away your shield, go right ahead. An amulet that's really good if you go with something like the Princess or another cold, something that works well with cold, is City Breath. You will take this off at level 48 when you switch to Rakiata's Dance, but City Breath actually can be equipped at level 1 and is actually really strong. It's kind of a travesty that City Breath, it's too limited. It doesn't have enough synergy with other minion stuff. Like, there's no way to make this good for the end game, but it's a good amount of added cold, 50% cold conversion. It's got good stats. It's just too restrictive. This you can level with all the way to 48 comfortably. That's what I did with this Guardian. In fact, I didn't use a different weapon besides the Princess all the way to level 48. And then once you slap on your big boy sword and your Eye of Malice, your damage will just be absolutely hilarious, and you can cruise your way all the way up through the white maps and get your resists capped at 75 and your Uber Lab, and then cruise through the yellow maps and just upgrade as you go, as you find whatever. And by the time you're at T14s, maybe then you'll have to slow down a little bit, but not very much. Like I said, very incremental progression. At this point, and you got your resistances capped at 75, the next thing you want to do is buy some cheap Spectres, like you'll have 2 Spectres, and probably get the Robot Dog, and probably not the Gracebird because it'll probably die. That's up to you, whichever Spectre you want to get at that point. They're cheap. You can even just get a perfect meat sack, which is actually pretty decent. It gives more minion life. The next thing you're wanting to buy is Replica Covenant. And at that point, in fact, this is the Phase 2, or the Phase 1, sorry. And again, this is all detailed with just like super dirt cheap items, just the absolute bare minimum. Like, you can resists off your jewels, like, it's just assuming everything only has 2 decent stats, and a bare minimum 10 passive clusters jewel with Feasting Fiends, just so you can get some life leech. No timeless jewel. This is just absolute bare minimum. This will function and start mapping. And this is even assuming you only have a 5 link. So you can see less than 1 million still on the DPS. If you have a 6 link, you can see almost 1 million. But then when you swap in for your 6 socket for boss time, you can see over 1 million. At the level of, like, I just beat Uberlab and I'm like level 78 and I'm just going through white and yellow maps. This is really good. All right, so what I was talking about with the upgrades you're saving for is going to be the point that I call phase 2. So phase 2 is where you're going to grab all the most key parts of the build and just kind of assemble Exodia per se. And you're at this point you're looking at around 8 to 9 million. This is again assuming just one power charge. In fact, yeah, we should be assuming a little more than that. Let me fix this before I link it. All right, well, maybe not 2 power charges. Most likely 2 though. So you can see this go over 9 even. Again, still not with Val Haste selected. If you turn that on, you can see up to 11 million, right? And even a little bit more potentially. Phase 2 is where, again, you've got all the important pieces together. So you'll have got your Replica Covenant. Before you do have your Devouring Diadem, you will have to point over to Eldritch Battery on the tree. And you may just use this cluster socket instead, right? But you need the Eldritch Battery as soon as you have your Replica Covenant. So as soon as you have your Replica Covenant, the next thing you grab is Devouring Diadem. And that lets you go ahead and unspec and keep everything over here. And probably even at that point, grab your extra Spectre. Which I think is how this is set up. Yeah, Perfect Primal Thunderbird, Hulking Miscreation, and regular Naval Officer, which gives you the precision. It's a ton of accuracy, by the way, from precision and a ton of crit chance. And you'll see there's an Animate Guardian section. So at this point, the hardest part will be your 4-5 link in the Rakiata's Dance. Still needing 4 blue sockets. So this will still be probably the biggest hurdle of what I call phase 2. But once it's very worth aiming for it as quick as you can, because once you have the Animate Guardian going, this is the Explody Animate Guardian setup, taking advantage of Gravebind. Once you upgrade from here, you'll be perfectly fine going back to melee splash because the damage will be way higher. But this will really help you farm. So Gravebind gives credit of enemy kills to your Animate Guardian instead of you and your minions. You've got an explosion trigger off of the mace. You can get a mace like this for like 10 chaos or less often. You'll see that last line, enemies killed with attacker spell hits, and it does count as his. Explode for fire damage. And Impulse's Broken Heart. Because the Rakiata Stance swords deal lightning damage and have high crit chance, pretty much every enemy that dies is going to be shocked already, so that triggers Impulses. And 2 different explosion effects do stack. There's no cap on that. So fire and lightning damage based on max life. This ends up dealing a lot of clear damage for you. It's really good. And then you can take further advantage of the Gravebind with Victario's Charity to get more power and frenzy charges. This helps keep those charges kind of where you would expect them, still about the same level as when the build's all the way built. And lastly, just make sure you've got Brittle Ground on your boots. And you know what would be better is to actually, I should replace this with the life regeneration and chaos resist, but it's not too important. You can, when you're looking at this POB, you'll notice if you go to calcs, you pick your group with the Animate Guardian in it, pick your Animate Guardian, you've got show minions stacked, and it's going to ask which item set, either default, which is the one you've got for yourself. The Animate Guardian's item set is the second set of items. So a little tip, whenever you're building your Animate Guardian, make sure to copy and paste from the game like this. Control C, Control V, and you can add to build. Make sure to actually build an item set and save it for your Animate Guardian. Because that's going to be the only record you will ever have for what your Animate Guardian's actually wearing. All right. You can see the brittle ground. One of the reasons that's so important. Look at that. Over 1.5 million damage. This is also lowballing the shock and chill effects, but depending on how hard you push, what kind of enemies you're fighting, how much juice you try to farm, at this point, maybe you won't see more than 10% shock, right? But this is a pretty realistic kind of a phase 2. I'd say this budget at this point, like a few between these two items, and then maybe 1 or 2 more for a Rakiata's Dance with 6 sockets, and then you 5-link it, and then you get the colors. You know, this is way less than 10 divines in total. These are all just example items with just decent 3 stats. That's kind of what I'm doing when I'm budgeting. I'm looking for 3 stats of like tier 3 resist, tier 3 life, and maybe a 3rd stat that I want, right? Like and a leather belt, right? And you can see at this point with just really basic sample gear, we're way overcapped on resists, and we got some chaos resist. Armor could be better, but that's one of the reasons you have a granite flask. And our EHP is kind of workable. You want to pay more attention to max hit than the EHP, because this is not really taken into account what your sustain really is like. So you got your time of need and your feast of flesh still, and this is with elements. This is with purity of elements. So of the 2 flasks, you got your poison immunity, which isn't actually important, but you might as well while you're using purity of elements, and your corrupted blood. And for Pantheon, you're looking at Soul of Raslotha, and while you're running Purity of Elements, you don't care about Freeze, Ignite, or Shock, or Brittle, or any of the elemental ailments. You can roll with Soul of Lunaris. So you've got your Guardian Heal, your Feast of Flesh from Devouring Diadem, and you've got Soul of Raslotha keeping your life flasks always usable. So the sustain on this build, you recover immediately from heavy damage. Really all you're worried about is getting killed instantly. It's the only thing you're trying to keep an eye out for. Now, while you're at this stage, that can still happen depending on how dangerous of stuff you're running. By the time we get our way to the phase 3 level, you can see these numbers are good but higher. And I want to mention, and before I'm done here, an alternative defensive setup that sacrifices a little bit of damage, but might be worth trying if you want to. And definitely also wants Progenesis even more. And that's using, you can see the damage in this alternate POB is a good bit lower at 26.7 million. It's taking advantage of Bloodnotch. That's where you get, that goes up to 60%, but it doesn't need to be perfect. From stunning hits is recovered as life. So you build around Bloodnotch so that you have, inconceivable, unnoticeable stuns. And you set yourself up so that you're stunned all the time. You take an energy shield mastery, so that stun threshold is based on energy shield instead of life as much as possible, and you got much lower shield, so you get stunned really easy. You get stunned all the time. So you're getting stunned, and you can't even tell when you get stunned, but you still recover a whole bunch of life, and recover is not regenerate, so recover is not blocked by as many things. You get to run Petrified Blood, and that counters the effect very much of the drain from Petrified Blood. And on top of that, you get to run Cast When Stunned instead of Cast When Damage Taken, which doesn't have the same level restriction as Cast When Damage Taken. And the higher level and higher quality Cast When Stunned, it's just the higher chance it has to trigger. So you get to run your max level Immortal Call instead of just the level 3 Immortal Call. And you can also link your extra Desecrate to this as well, so that you get Corpse Generation to fuel the Feast of Flesh more, right? But this requires another gem socket, so you probably need 2 unset rings to really get this all set up, which is DPS loss because you can get some damage on your ring. And you also have to replace some jewels as well, like Quickening Covenant's got to go, and you'll see it in the POB if you want to do it. I played another Simulacrum with it, and still managed to clear it, and I did feel better sustain But I still end up dying a few times from the same problems of, you know, like if the mods were bad, Omniphobia can just jump over and one-shot you. So, Progenesis is what you need to actually make this build tanky. And Soul Over Slotha does help you have access to it. Like if you see in the Uber Duper Elder video, you can see that the Taste of Hate was being pretty reliable. You do swap this in for your Quicksilver for any encounter where it helps. You also change your flasks a little bit for the Petrified Blood setup too. And that covers everything. So again, it's a build I've enjoyed a lot, and I'll see if I can take it a little further. Of course, there's always room for upgrades in Path of Exile, and the budget just starts, you know, the budget demands just start getting higher and higher and higher before you see more upgrades. But I'd say at the point of investment we're at here, like 70 divines worth of stuff, for the damage it can deal and the content it can clear and just kind of the fun, and then being that it's a totally new skill with this league, and it's kind of a cool concept, interesting, and you have tons of fun little pieces to put together if you just enjoy making a build, just putting things together. You know, this is one I really enjoy and would recommend if you like the idea too. So yeah, if you have any ideas to improve on it, or have any questions, if you want to give it a try, let me know. And thanks for watching.